In last week's episode, we talked about the hoodie. Let's see what you had to say. Victor Ramirez writes a really telling comment about his school banning the hoodie and that ban extending to other articles of clothing that have hoods on them, and tells a story about someone who is walking to school, it's cold out, and having to have their hooded article of clothing removed simply because it has a hood, because of the associations that hoods took on where he's from. And I think that this sort of marries a lot of the topics that I think we're going to talk about in this comment response upcoming. That there is the practical existence of the hoodie as an article of clothing that keeps you warm, that is inexpensive, and that has many uses, but then there is the associations that people have with the hoodie as such, and then the hood itself, and that it is very hard to separate all of these things, I think, and that we're going to end up eventually talking about how, you know, oh, the hoodie is just an article of clothing, like people simply wear it because it's cheap. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has all of these meanings associated with it. And I think, you know, it might be that, in fact, it does mean that. And I think, yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that. Cule Chick and Claire both point out uses of the hoodie that we didn't talk about, which is how they work, or the work that they do when they are worn by women specifically, and that the hoodie is something that, when in providing anonymity, can sort of hide one from the world almost, and provides something of a shield of against the kind of public harassment that as a woman you might be subject to. And yeah, I mean, this is also part of this conversation. Like, what does the hoodie become when it is worn not by a black man but by a woman? And you know, something that we didn't get into. So yeah, thank you for sharing your experiences. Dragonfish and a bunch of other people pointed out that in parts of Canada, the hoodie is called a bunny hug, and that is adorable and ridiculous. Love you, Canada. I mean, there is, I don't know if there's something to be said about how the overall meaning or reference that the hoodie makes would be different were it to be understood as a bunny hug in the minds of all people. I mean, stands to reason, right? Man, Canada. Harry T Dyer, as usual, writes a really great comment and gets to, I think, something that we were trying to get at, but didn't really state outright, which is that the hoodie has become a symbol for the kind of threat, or a kind of threat that you might encounter in certain parts of the world, and that when the hoodie takes on that symbol, what it does is it places the blame on the people that we associate with it, and not the underlying causes that have led those people to, you know, the environment that they're in, or to the situations that they feel they have no control over. You know, and it makes me think a lot about, you know, the conversations about places like Ferguson that happened in the United States in the recent past, where it's like you have people who are protesting and who are damaging property, and you have people watching these folks and asking why would these people destroy their own neighborhood, without then asking the question why those people might not feel as though that neighborhood is theirs. And that, you know, I think that we can see the hoodie as being a similar sort of thing. It's like, why is it in many situations in many cities around the world that we see this kind of person getting involved in this kind of situation wearing a hoodie? And so we ask, you know, why do these hoodie wearers do this kind of thing, and not asking why it is those people are wearing a hoodie. Like, what is it about the hoodie that makes it a viable piece of clothing for them? You know, we're going to talk about cost in a second. But then also why those people might feel like the actions that they're taking are the only choices they have. So yeah, Harry's comments really good, and sort of, I think, open up a more interesting and a wider range of ideas related to the sociocultural situation. Dull Cave makes the really great point that there is an aspect of hipsterdom that is communicated by American Apparel that is more of a nostalgia for maybe the 90s than it is the kind of appropriation that we might say is exhibited in hipsterdom as a whole. And I think that this, in general, is true, and I think this is a really great observation. And I think that it is true largely if you think of American Apparel as being defined by its color palette, and also by its provision of basics. Its t-shirts, its hoodies, the socks, their standard dress forms and sweaters and stuff like that. But I do think that that doesn't necessarily mean that in its constant experimentation, which it was always doing, trying to offer new products, new cuts, new styles, that it isn't guilty of this, that it did not exhibit the kind of borrowing from other cultures that we tend to understand happens within hipsterdom. And I also think that it's not to say that the products themselves don't often come with a history, and that in American Apparel's grasping at a kind of aesthetic nostalgia, that history isn't erased. And I think that the hoodie and other articles of clothing that American Apparel provided can stand for both of those things, or they can act in both of those ways. But yeah, this is a really great comment. Recommend reading the whole thing and all the others. We'll put links in the doobly-doo. Love Waffle on the subreddit points out through an extra credits video that in the Division, the hoodie is the symbol that is used to indicate that certain NPCs are the enemy. And someone actually on Twitter pointed out, and I couldn't find the tweet, so forgive me if you're watching and I'm not giving you credit, let me know. Pointed out that in, I think it was either Watch Dogs or Watch Dogs 2, people who wear hoodies are the people, it indicates that those are the people who it is okay to shoot at. And I think that it just speaks to the complicated nature of the hoodie, but also the fact that in certain situations it means something. It means these things, that you can have a AAA game that puts the bad guys in hoodies, and that is a clear signal, or becomes a clear signal, that they are bad. And that's, whoa. J-McK asks whether or not there is anything that you can put around your body that is not a political statement, and arrives at the unfortunate answer, which is no. Sorry. Bitcoon and Tyler Matthew Harris ask my favorite question, which is why. Why do we have to talk about this? What's the point? It's just a hoodie. Why overthink these things? Because... No, but seriously, I'm gonna do the same thing that I did when we answered this question for our Overwatch video, which is, today the news came out about the TRAPPIST-1 system and the, I think was it 7 planets that are exoplanets, Earth-like, 40 light years away. Everybody's losing it, and about how cool this is, and about the fact that there are some planets in a habitable zone. Super cool, really interesting. And no one is, I don't see in any of the comments on any of the news articles that I've read about this, people being like, yeah, but why does it matter? Like, why are we talking about this? They're 40 light years away. It's not like we're ever gonna move to them. It would take 700,000 years to get there. This is dumb. What's the point? And so, I think the point that I'm trying to make is that it becomes exhausting, maybe, to constantly defend the importance of the work that you're trying to do. But I understand, because we work within a system where the humanities in general are not, I think, billed, especially in a lot of education systems, as inherently useful in the way that the sciences are billed as inherently useful. So that's that's the uphill battle that we're always fighting. So what I want to say is this stuff is important because we are talking about the way things work and the way things affect our lives, in the same way that a science channel might talk about those things. A lot of times I think the reticence or the skepticism comes from the fact that we don't have answers. And for me, it's exciting that there are no answers because we're talking about human experience. And the hardest thing about human experience is that every human has one. And so it makes it hard to appreciate someone else's, but it also makes it a great and awesome challenge. And when you can do it, and when you can reflect the experience of someone else, and you can do it in a widespread way, and you can invite other people into it, then I think that it is incredibly valuable, and I think it develops empathy and understanding for other people. And so that's why we talk about those things, in order to, I don't know, if I want to be really grand, convene a human community. As far as the question of, don't we have more important things to do? Aren't there actions that we can take, et cetera, et cetera? I would charge that the answer to the first question is no, there are not more important things to do, because what we are trying to do is we are trying to show how people make meaning and relate to one another in the highest stakes situations. Last week's episode we talked about how the meaning of an article of clothing got someone killed, and inspired literally millions of people to march. So I don't know how much more important we can get. And frankly, I think it's a fallacy of relative privation anyway. So why aren't you out curing cancer? Blah 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 blah. As to the second question of what do we do? Idea Channel has, excuse me, I have a cold. Has a very smart group of audience members. Shouldn't we be mobilizing in some way? And to that I say yes, you should be. You should care, and you should be taking the things that we talk about here, and you should be acting on them every day. And I think that if you can do that, then you are mobilized. You are being active as an Idea Channel community member, as an audience member, as a human being. But I think that it's, I barely want to tell you what to think. At the end of every episode, we ask a question after I've shared what I think is the case, right? It's called Idea Channel. It's not called Fact Channel. So far be it for me, I think, to tell you what to do. But I think that if you are having conversations in the comment section of our videos, you're talking to other people, you are acting. You are confronting things. It's just if you're doing it in a way where you're not confronting the actual work or the complicated nature of your hesitancy to treat these ideas with importance, then you're like halfway there. So I would say if you're feeling like there's work to be done and you're not doing it, the first step is to try to treat the ideas that we talk about with the importance that other people in the conversation who seem to treat them with importance do. Because that's a human who has an experience, who sees this as important. And if you can understand why, then you're doing it.